Never give up.
What was that?
Never give up.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You're going to get a quote from Churchill in a little bit. So, this is the third crack at this. I've tested your patience. You've had 3 hours of me already, and now we got another hour and a half to go. And that's a lot for anybody to put up with anybody. So thank you for your patience and for your tenacity in sticking with it. I want to thank Rick for leading worship while we've been doing this. Thank you very much for doing that, Rick. Appreciate it. And I think you guys already know this, but your regional leadership team really does sweat this stuff. They really do want these meetings to be worth the opportunity cost of leaving home and work where you are to come here and do this. And they really sweat it. And I've appreciated seeing how this works, at least on this side of the fence. I don't do this sort of stuff back home, so I get to see it from here, which is actually kind of cool. I like that. I enjoy it a lot. Some old business before we move into the thing I want to talk about this morning, which is the third talk. So Tim, could you get up that slide? This is a quote by our venerable friend Winston Churchill. I mentioned this biography I've been reading. And I found this, and I thought, this is too good, I'm going to share this. He wrote this about his own education experience of being at Sandhurst, which is a military school, and then trying to backfill by just having this huge reading program that he had in his mid to late 20s. And he said this: "I pity undergraduates when I see what frivolous lives many of them lead in the midst of precious, fleeting opportunity. After all, a man's life, or woman's life, must be nailed to a cross of either thought or action." And put in context of what that guy did later in life, in which he was very much a man of action. But then also a life of reflection. He wrote numerous books and spent an awful lot of time trying to integrate and think about what he had learned classically. He was an autodidact. He had to do an awful lot of his own education, actually, along the way. But your life must be nailed to a cross of either thought or action. And as we think about who we are and the kind of people we work with, are our people of thought and or people of action? And who are we trying to reach? And what is it we're actually trying to do? So keep that in mind. You can take that one off.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
Just a question. Will you have a time for sort of general question and answer?
Yeah.
Even including previous talks?
Okay. I hope at the end here I've preserved enough time for that to happen, so, all right.
Thanks.
Cool. Before we get to that, a couple other things. One is that I left things off yesterday. I just did not manage the clock as well as I should have. So, in talking about identifying leaders, I told you what I do. Again, this is descriptive, not normative. It's just what I do. You know, I do the coffee thing. I'm asking, hopefully, good questions, trying to figure out and discern what does this person bring to the table, how do we serve them, but then also how could they potentially grow into leaders that could help carry the ministry forward. That's the identify part. When it comes to recruit and train, the recruiting part for us is we try to create really easy on-ramps. So one of the things, let me describe the crisis and how we responded to the crisis. One of my former students, in the middle of an exec meeting, said, as we were talking about trying to raise up leaders for the following year, he said, you know, we don't develop leaders, we use them. And he didn't know it, but it went like straight through here and through here. It's like, oh my goodness. I actually said something else. But I realized he's right. What I was doing with undergrads, with all that acres of time and energy, was really easy to develop leaders with undergrads. But with grad students, because nobody's double majoring in InterVarsity plus their field of study. InterVarsity for them, ministry commitments of any kind are only secondary or tertiary commitments. And it's especially true of faculty. They can only be tertiary. And so how do you develop leaders when you've got people who are only available to you this much? And so what we were doing, and he with one comment he just pointed out, we don't develop people, we use them. Is that, you know, we were trying to find people who other people had invested in, who had leadership gifts and abilities, and we were just trying to plug them into spots that we needed. And I realized that is using people in a way that I'm not comfortable with, that we shouldn't be doing this. People shouldn't be just cogs in my particular machine that I'm trying to build. And so we had a big, long, hard think and heart-to-heart about how we're actually going to do what we need to do to develop people as they come in. And so here's the easy on-ramps that we developed. Previously, we had our small groups were what I did with undergrad small group kind of models, and that is we had one leader who was pretty much the show, and they did everything. And with undergrads, we could pull that off and make it work. On an occasional basis, we would have 2 co-leaders. With grad students, I realized we just need to have co-leaders. As a matter of fact, you can't start a small group by yourself. You have to have a co-leader so that you can share the load. And after that conversation, we realized we need to do this even further. So we created a category called Strong Partners. And Strong Partners were the people that did, they were in charge of the prayer requests, they were in charge of the snacks, they were in charge of the social events, and they were in charge of service opportunities. So for any small group that we had strong partners who took care of that stuff, and the co-leaders who took care of the content.
They're like the deacons.
Exactly. Yeah, deacons and bishops, you could do it that way. And so for us to start a small group requires at least 4 people. And by doing it with the 4 people, we then created a leadership culture in which you now have a team that's going to lead a small group of, let's say, 6. 4 of you are in leadership positions, which seems kind of goofy, but that's actually how we started it. And some of those groups will grow to 12, that sort of thing. But now our model is you always have to have 4 people to start a small group. That's a way of trying to create easy on-ramps, that kind of thing. What we did by doing that, by the way, and is a great side effect, is that our small groups now have these longitudinal lives together. Instead of people burning out after a year or 2, now they are together typically as a cohort for 5 years or more, and we're adding people and losing people as we go, but these groups have got a history together that stretches back several generations.
Amen.
Isn't that a cool way to go? Yeah, it is. So by trying to do the right thing, by trying to treat people well, we've actually made the fellowship deeper, and we have this longitudinal thing of people. I mean, when these people get married, they're in each other's weddings, you know, that kind of stuff. When a friend of Carrie and mine, Sarah Scheineman, do you remember Sarah?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Sarah used to be in GFM and worked with Kiam and company. She underwent something called, she became a consecrated virgin within the Catholic Church recently. There was a group of women in a small group together who've now reached from shore to shore, and when she went to this ceremony in Green Bay, Wisconsin, it isn't exactly easy to get to, the room was filled with that community of husbands and kids that came there to celebrate Sarah, and I got to be a part of that. It was an outstanding day together of doing that kind of stuff, but again, the unintended consequence of trying to do the right thing ended up being the deep thing as well. The other thing I failed to mention yesterday, you guys got this book now. Let me just tell you one other thing that we did, which was actually really helpful, and that is, out of that conversation, we don't develop leaders, we use them. I thought I, as a staff worker, have to do something specific, I think, in terms of trying to create a cohort to do leadership training. And so my sons play soccer, as I mentioned. If you've heard of it, soccer academies, you know, there's this sort of elite, by invitation sorts of things that you get to go and train with people who are really serious about this. So I said, we're going to start a leadership academy. And so it was by invitation, and I was trying to figure out, what am I going to do with it? And so I landed on this book. There are lots of really good leadership books out there. I just happened to land on this one because I really like John White, for one thing, and I really like this book in that he's talking about leadership, but he's doing it through the life of Nehemiah. So it's not exactly a commentary, but rather a long discourse of his interaction with Nehemiah as a leader. And so it's like an extended Bible study manuscript, because the entire text of Nehemiah, most of the text of Nehemiah is actually in the book. So I can have students do the manuscript study in the context of the book, which is pretty cool. And he is talking about his intervarsity experiences as a president of IV in England. So the book works on several levels that way. It's in Scripture, it's reflection from somebody who is deep in our world, and who really kind of gets what it is we're trying to do on campus. So that's why I like the book. I think there's 9 chapters altogether, and I split it into 5 2-hour segments. So over the course of a semester, I and my co-leader, and the co-leader is always last year's president, They are by dint of saying yes to being president, saying yes to being my co-leader for this academy. So it's 5 two-hour sessions. It's generally 3 Saturday mornings over breakfast and 2 evenings over supper. It's no more than 2 hours, and I have now a curriculum that I've iteration after iteration after iteration, I think up to the 9th iteration now, of just keeping honing the same thing. And it's been really, really good to do, and students seem to enjoy it. They like the fact that it's by invitation, that we pick them out. Typically it's students in their second or third year. We don't allow students in their first year to hold leadership positions. We tell them you have to really key in on doing your studies well, getting into good favor in your department. No, you don't get to be anything related to leadership in InterVarsity your first year. We'll see you at the beginning of your second. If they see real promise, we invite them in the second year to this cohort, and then hopefully in years 3, 4, 5, they're with us and leading stuff. Is this all making sense?
Yes.
Let me just say, this isn't the key. The key is the invitation, and the key is the intentionality. You can choose whatever book you really like and go with it. The big deal is that you're actually honoring them and signaling to them that we really take leadership seriously and we want to invest in you. We're not just utilizing you, we are trying to invest in you. And investment isn't just near term. There are times when we actually pull in people from professional schools who are in their last year, and we'll bring them into the cohort and say, you're never going to lead for us, but we want to invest in you because you're going to lead going forth out of here. This is an investment in the church over the long term. This is part of our gift to the church. So that's the kind of invitations we're creating, and people, as I say, respond to that well. Let me just pause here. Do you have questions about that?
You run it first and second semester, 2 different cohorts each semester, or just one?
One a year, in the spring semester.
Spring semester.
Yeah,
okay.
fall semester for us is kind of wall to wall with everything going on. Spring semester, we've actually got some space that we can actually do this kind of stuff.
John, did any professional students flip through that scheme? Because their programs are shorter.
They're very short, that's right. So I've had business school students who are there for 3 years.
Yeah.
Do it in their second year and they're leading their third. Yeah, but that's rare.
I want to underscore the thing when your students say to you, or one student says to you, a word of truth that is very hard to hear, that really can be the turning point for the whole thing. I just want to underscore that. That happened at Berkeley when my student leader said the same thing, and it changed everything, and just want to underscore that.
So let me just say too, our students can tell very quickly when they're spirit carriers for the ministry, or are you actually looking for partnership?
Right.
Because when we just have slots we're trying to fill, they perceive that very quickly.
Yes.
Now we're just utilizing them to carry on. They're helping me get my job done.
Right. They're being used, not developed.
Exactly. And that is a really ugly dynamic. And hopefully we are not in that business. We really want to be about developing people who are not only do the things that we want to do on campus, but really in the church broadly, and in their professions, and in their neighborhoods. That's the kind of ethic regarding leadership we want to develop.
But it's easy to get defensive when they come to you with this, so I just want to make sure we're all noting that John took it in and listened to it and responded. Because you could have had you could have shut it down, and I was tempted to do that too. So I think we need to be people who can hear that from our students.
Well, isn't it true for you guys? I hope it's true. It's certainly true in my own life. No, I'm starting to pontificate, but they've become some of my best friends.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Over time, these are the people who I lean on, and I just, I think we all love them to death. And they're just not students; they've become really our friends, colleagues, neighbors. Love them. So go on.
So you said like the first year you wanted them to have like encourage them to study well, right?
Yeah.
The second year, the fourth semester, that you're gonna stay busy, so you invest them in spring semester.
Right.
What if the master only have 2 years?
Exactly.
That means there's a transition the spring semester for them to look for a
Yes.
job and things.
Yes.
How can we pull them out from all of that transition?
So you're asking a great question. So what I'm describing is mostly for grad students who are doing PhDs. So I've got them for 5 to 7 years. I was telling somebody over breakfast that when I'm working with grad students, I'm playing chess. I've got them for 5 to 7 years, sometimes longer. When I'm working with professional schools, I'm playing poker. Play poker, every time it's a new deal, you get a new hand. Who have I got this year? And they can make you look like a genius because you drew a great hand that year. And they can make you look like a complete idiot as a staff worker because you just didn't get good cards. And there's nothing you can do about it. That's just the nature of working in professional schools. That's especially true in med schools now, where, oh my gosh, they've now in Wisconsin, this is true around the country, I've heard, they have pushed 4 semesters of education into 3 in order to be able to give them more time to actually do a discernment process about where they want to go for residencies, that kind of stuff. Well, try developing leaders in 3 semesters. Okay.
What's the game you play with faculty?
So that's a great question. 3-dimensional chess.
It's the Matrix, guys.
So there are faculty, I mean, these are people we do life with over the course of our career.
Yes,
I've got
amen.
since we got 5 to 7 to 9 years sometimes.
Amen, amen.
But faculty, this is lifelong, and so it's an entirely different dynamic. Yeah, and a harder one in some respects.
Do you use this material?
I do not. So if you guys have got ways that you develop leadership within faculty and academic staff, I'd love to hear about it. Because they are generally ensconced in their churches. They're deacons and elders in their churches. What is it that we're going to do on campus that's going to be specific to them in terms of development? We do integration kinds of stuff. I should mention this too. Going back to the small group thing, besides that structure, and I mentioned large groups, we've got that structure. Another structure we invest in, and I really like it, is that we develop integration groups. Christianity and the humanities, Christianity and the hard sciences, Christianity and public policy, Christianity, environmental sciences, policy, and law, that kind of stuff. So if we have students, we did one in the School of Education for a number of years, if we've got students in those specific kinds of realms of the university, we'll make invitations that say, we want to do vocational discipleship. Your first tier commitment is get into a small group Bible study. We think that's the most important thing you can do. But as a second tier commitment, and we think this would be really good for you, even if for a season of your life, is get into a group of people who are really trying to work out the implications of the faith as a scientist. How can we backfill what you need to know about thinking hard about the biblical studies, the theology, and the ethics of being in the hard sciences? And that has been really fun for me. That's actually one of the things I enjoy most, is cooking up curriculum for those things with the students and with faculty, and saying, okay, we're going to pull this together, we're going to meet every other week or once a month. The humanities group gets together every week, no joke. They read each other's papers, they write together, they read each other's stuff, I think I just said that, and it's just really fun. So anyway, yes?
As going back to your developing, not using leaders and people seeing through if you just want to use them. I've had an experience where I think that the people that are inviting the partnership, and that's what scares them off. They do want to fill a role because they just want to do this narrow thing. They don't want to be a partner. Do you experience that, and how do you work with that?
So yes, I do experience that. So generally, we try to make sure that the leadership responsibilities we invite them into are appropriately sized for the life that they have. So the one person who actually probably really takes a hit year to year to year is the president. That's the person who I invest in the most, and they're the person who, in some respects, is doing my job. Who was I talking to? Matt, where are you? Are you in here? There's Matt. So Matt did the Fresno Urban Project or something like that with Todd and Carrie Minturn. Some of you remember Todd and Carrie. Carrie was a student. She was my president, and for 2 years, and it was the fellowship was amazing. Carrie was the president, and it was one of those things where Carrie, you're doing 90% of the work, and I get 90% of the credit. And I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. That's the way it was one of those things where this is a student-led fellowship, but we have to make sure that the responsibilities and tasks that we're asking them to take up are appropriately sized to the lives that they have. So I ask for partnership, but make sure that they understand that here's what it's going to look like. Just a clear picture. It's going to be this wide, not this wide. But as I said, the president really does take a big piece of the puzzle.
Would you have any thoughts on equipping our faculty or our students for leadership in their department. I mean, not for our deal,
Right.
but for, I mean, because my students are like on the grad student senate, and my faculty end up being, you know, deans, and they, you know, president of the faculty senate nationally or statewide. What are some things we would have to offer those people in their deal?
That's a great question. We do on occasion have luncheons, well, we do luncheons monthly with faculty. On occasion, we'll actually try to get at that. What does it mean to be a faculty person who professes? So in the classroom, what does it mean to teach? What is your specific responsibilities about that kind of stuff? But then there's also the service component built into any university that has this idea of shared governance. You guys don't, so you know shared governance. It means that the faculty have a role in running the university. So what is that going to look like, and what do you bring to the table as a Christian in that role? We will do that on an occasional basis. They almost always talk about shared governance, and you kind of get the eye roll, and they sit back in the seats, and it's like this. Because nobody really enjoys this process. There's a handful of people that do, and the people that really enjoy it, nobody else understands it. They just don't get it. If you've got things that you guys do in that regard, I'd love to hear about it. Yeah. So let me move on, because I'm letting the clock get away from me again. The thing that I sent out to you, that Bill Hybels article, you don't need to look it up right now, but let me just say that that is actually a really key piece of the puzzle in terms of when we are trying to recruit leaders, is that they have in their head, here's what a leader is supposed to look like. And when I was working with undergrads, as I said, undergrads were really available to me, and I had really strong leaders oftentimes that just had a lot of high social IQ. They just understood processes and people, and they were really great. And when I came to work with grad students, I thought I'm just getting the same people, only faster, deeper, smarter. And I was so wrong. These people, lower social IQ, less available, are really good at saying no.
Yeah.
Professionalized in a particular kind of a way, but with a narrower set of interests. And really just in terms of just basic humanity, I just less to work with. I was I was so shocked and so disappointed. I thought this is going to be so great coming to GFM, and I was like, oh my gosh. Oh my, I have got to readjust my expectations completely.
All right, John,
Yes.
let's say less to work with in some ways, but in other ways.
Bring it back.
They're going to walk out and quote that. And so wouldn't you say that,
on Facebook
some of these people, you guys should shut up and listen. Some of these people are Renaissance people. They are brilliant. But you find them, right? So that's not less humanity, that's more humanity.
No, that's right, that's true, that's
I
true.
just want to balance out that.
So what Carrie's saying is very true, and I've made the adjustment. I had to readjust my expectations of what leadership was going to look like. And so I'm trying to go with this, if I can remember what it is, there we go, is that the Hybels article is really good about, after students reading it, realizing that leadership can look very different depending on your skills and gifting and temperament. And the Hybels thing helps people point that out, and they can see themselves saying, well, I could be that kind of leader. Because typically they have a notion of what it means to be a leader that doesn't look anything like who they are. And what we're trying to do is give them an opportunity to think about, actually you could be a leader, because oftentimes, I don't know if you guys find this, is that grad students they weren't invited into leadership positions in high school and in undergrads. They were the people in the corner with a book.
Yep.
The high social IQ people, the fraternity sorority people, the ones who were invited into leadership positions, they were studying. So they come to grad school, and we are trying to form a leadership culture with people who actually have never been able to do that before. So case in point, Paula brought this woman to mind for me. Karen is from South Africa. She is brilliant. She is very understated. You would never know that this woman has got the IQ, and she is amazing. She also has a physical disability that's very noticeable, and she has all her life tried to hide it as best she could, but it's very noticeable. Nobody has ever invited her into leadership positions until somebody asked her to score cricket. And they had no idea what they were dealing with. She is amazing. She could be international level cricket scorer kind of a person, right? But that was it. That was the only people that ever asked her to do something was score cricket. And so when we first met, she was like this to me. And she did not want to really have anything to do with me. I invited her out for coffee, and she said, maybe someday. That was year 1. Year 2, you know, Karen, I see you hanging around. You know, we never did have that coffee. Could we do that sometime? Yeah, soon. That was, and this is 3 semesters in. We finally have the coffee, and she just natively just trusted people like me. People like me always disappointed her. And so she really didn't really have much to do with me. We eventually, through mutual friends who convinced her that I was okay, again, it's one of those things where your students and the faculty will vouch for you. Convinced her that you really should get together sometime with this guy. He's actually got things that I think you would actually enjoy him. You'd enjoy his company. So we did. And long story short, Karen became our president, which 5 years earlier I would never have guessed. But Karen wasn't just any old president. This woman was amazing in those roles. She was an initiate. She could initiate, she could create, she could run, she could administer. She was a great friend. I said, Karen, it's like the Carrie Thompson thing, Carrie Minturn. You're doing 90% of the work, and I'm getting 90% of the credit outside. But everybody inside knows that you're the bomb, and you're making this happen. So I am thrilled. At the end of her career, she actually went to Cambridge and did a 1-year master's in the history of science after having done a PhD in biochemistry. And because we were doing the science integration group, she got so enthralled in the history of science and the philosophy of science, she went to Cambridge to do this 1-year master's. And now she's going to Belfast to do a postdoc in Belfast at Trinity, or not Trinity, whatever is in Belfast, Queen's College? Anyway, yeah. So at any rate, she is our gift to the church. And she's our gift to academia. That kind of thing. But it's it's one of those, you're trying to find people who've never been given an opportunity before and trying to help them see that, yes, you could be a leader. You could do this. Isn't that cool?
Yes.
Amen.
This is nowhere in my script, by the way.
It's good.
But it was inspired by the Spirit.
There we go. So let's watch the clock here. So if you send me an email and say, can you send me the curriculum that you do, the leadership development thing? I may have sent it to Brian already, I can't remember if I did. But if I didn't, just ping me with an email and I'll send it to you. It's the 9th iteration, and just look it over, and to the extent that it does you any good, that's worth it. And just bin it if you say, that isn't me, I'd never make that work. All right. So we're going to get to, I asked you guys to read the Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail. You guys get that? Okay. Before we get to that, we're not going to discuss the whole thing. I'm just going to I'm going to ask one of you to actually read a chunk of it. But before we do that, let me just say that when I was driving down here, I told you I went to the NASCAR race in Sparta, Kentucky, northern Kentucky. And my route, I had an atlas in front of me. And I was like, well, rather than staying interstates, and actually most of the way from Sparta, Kentucky to Boone, North Carolina, it was 2-lane highway and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I got off the roads, and I actually really enjoyed it. It was really fun. Met a lot of really interesting people along the way. And but the thing that really made an impression on me as I'm going to all these small towns is the number of churches I saw, the number of steeples, and the number of them that said Baptist on them. And I was thinking to myself, this is a really amazing ecosystem of churches in small communities making this work. And it just made actually quite an impression on me as I drove down here. So keep that in mind as I am looking for a volunteer. Could I ask you to read for us, please? Yeah? Yeah. It's not that much. You're just going to have to stand up and say it loud. From here down to Warriors of Society.
Which page is that?
It's on page 9 if you printed it out. I think it's 9, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep. And it begins with the paragraph starting.
I have traveled.
There we go.
I have traveled the length and breadth of Alabama, Mississippi, and all the other southern states. On sweltering summer days and crisp autumn mornings, I have looked at the South's beautiful churches with their lofty spires pointing heavenward, I have beheld the impressive outlines of her massive religious education buildings. Over and over, I have found myself asking, what kind of people worship here? Who is their God? Where were their voices when the lips of Governor Barnett dripped with words of interposition and nullification? Where were they when Governor Wallace gave a clarion call for defiance and hatred? Where were their voices of support when bruised and weary Negro men and women decided to rise from the dark dungeons of complacency to the bright hills of creative protest? Yes, these questions are still in my mind. In deep disappointment, I have wept over the laxity of the church. But be assured that my tears have been tears of love. There can be no deep disappointment where there is not deep love. Yes, I love the church. How could I do otherwise? I am in the rather unique position of being the son, the grandson, and the great-grandson of preachers. Yes, I see the church as the body of Christ, but oh, how we have blemished and scarred that body through social neglect and through fear of being nonconformists. There was a time when the church was very powerful in the time when the early Christians rejoiced at being deemed worthy to suffer for what they believed. In those days, the church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. It was a thermostat that transformed the mores of society.
Thank you very much. So that's what I was thinking about as I was traveling through those back roads from Sparta, Kentucky to here. And what I'd like you to do at your tables then is to think about your people. Think about what Dr. King was writing about at that time. And then ask yourself, what would it take to move our people from being thermometers to thermostats? How do we go from being people who just merely record the conventions of the day, the room temperature and whether they're in, and rather become people who are thermostats who help set the temperature in their departments, in their universities, in their neighborhoods? How do we become those kinds of people? That's one thing, but how do we help the people around us, our students in particular, and faculty, become thermostats? So go ahead and go into your tables and table conversation over that thing for 10 minutes, please.
The mind of Christ.
As you were saying,
As I was saying, thank you, Harry. If we had time, I'd love to hear each table report in terms of what you thought to be the case in terms of how you can move your people from being thermometers to thermostats. I use this Martin Luther King letter from Birmingham jail every time we run the Leadership Academy. I didn't just choose it because I knew I was coming to the Southeast and going to see you guys. I thought, actually, this is what I use every time I do Leadership Academy. I also use the Hybels article every time I use Leadership Academy along with this. I'm just trying to show you guys evidences of the stuff I use. Here's one of the things I found, though, is that our people got to where they are not by upsetting the apple cart, but by participating in the apple cart and following all the rules. Our people are really good at figuring out what the institutional demands are and figuring out how to excel inside those things. They generally don't push. They didn't get to where they are because they push against the boundaries. They play inside of them. And so to bring this onto the table, you can just see them saying, oh, no. And I asked them to put themselves back into the position. If you were a grad student in the 1960s, in the South, where would you have been? Would you have been on the street? Or would you have been in your study carrel and in the lab? Be honest about that. And they get that answer, they answer it correctly in terms of where they know they would have been. Where should you have been? Okay, now once we've got that clear, where should you be today? And on what issues? What should you be caring about is this. What kind of leaders does the world need today? So that's the question we're trying to get to. So can we get to the next slide, please? This is my own goofy little taxonomy that I use in terms of trying to help my students and me keep our thinking straight about what it is we're trying to do. Can we go to the next slide? Please, I want to show you. This is important. Charles Malik wrote a book called The Christian Critique of the University. Did I get the title right?
Yeah.
Okay. And when I was being recruited to come on GFM staff, this was really what was used to recruit me. And there was a bunch of people in the room who all sort of saluted this. The university is a clear-cut fulcrum with which to move the world. More potently than by any other means, change the university and you change the world. I'm in. I want to change the world. The university seems to make a great place, you know, as a point of leverage. Let's do it. What is it going to take? What do we need to do?
Amen.
Amen?
Amen.
All right, so let's go back. Can we go back up after this? Okay, so my mind's changed on this over time, and you're catching me in a pretty good place. Thank you.
I was just thinking about that quote. I mean, I like it. I really don't know that, I don't know, I'm going to say this and it might sound wrong, but I think even if our vision is just to change the university, the fruit will come out of that.
That's right.
So I think that needs to be our focus.
Yes.
We don't even need to think about world changers. The fruit will come.
Right. So let me agree with that, and here's where I would agree, and that is when you go to the book of Acts, and you see how the book of Acts unfolds, there is nowhere that you find in Acts or in Paul's or Peter's letters or any place them talking about changing the world. That's God's job. If it's talked about at all, that's God's job. Our job is to try to be faithful
In the little
in the
things.
moment, right where we are in this community, in this time, in this place. In being faithful, you're actually anticipating where I want to go with this, in being faithful to where they are in that moment, in that space and time, and geographically, and by being faithful, they change the world. That's how you change the world, is by being faithful in the here and now and in the moment, where you are. That's where this comes into play. Before we can talk about building world-changing leaders, which works great on a masthead or on a postcard, that kind of thing, the first thing we really need to be attentive to is this. How do we go about disciple making? And this is one of the things that I want you to hear this straight, is that this is one of the things I worry about InterVarsity in some respects. And here's why I worry about it. Once upon a time, when I was a student, we had a pretty coherent way of developing disciples. It was called Bible and Life Levels 1,
Amen.
2, and 3.
Amen.
Remember this?
Amen.
All right. Now, I want to pause right there for a moment, and we're going to go back to our quiz, okay? And we're going to make a big zigzag here, so just pause on Bible and Life Level 1 for a moment. Tim, would you get us back to our quiz? I need you to go back to your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 thing, okay? And we're going to go to number 4. Who is this woman, and why does she matter? Don't answer. Don't answer. You know, some of you know who she is, but just write down, who is this leader on whose shoulders we stand? Do you recognize this person? You got your answer written down? Felicia, who is this?
That is Ruth Lewis Bentley. She was our first African-American woman staff.
All right.
And she served in Atlanta University Center, where I served. And I know her personally.
That's really cool. And somebody on whose shoulders we stand.
Yes.
All right.
Ruth Lewis, she was Ruth Lewis then. She's Ruth Lewis Bentley now.
Okay.
She and her husband, Dr. William Bentley, they started the National Black Evangelical Association.
That's right. Pretty cool. All right, next slide. Who's that?
I know that.
Just write it down. Write it down. Please. When I say who is this, I don't need a verbal response. You just
Those glasses are great. They're back in.
Aren't these glasses great? That's right.
Back in style.
All You got a pair? So those of you who know, who is this?
Barbara Boyd.
Why does Barbara Boyd matter? Who is that?
Bible and Life.
Bible and Life, Bubbles 1, 2,
Yes.
and 3, that's right. This lady was a tour de force. She was
Yes,
amazing.
he was.
How many of you don't know what Bible and Life is? Is there people in the room? Okay, that's a fair bit of us. Okay, so can somebody senior explain this briefly? Kevin.
Bible Life Level 1 was a weekend that really presented the Lordship of Christ, focused on quiet time, personal evangelism, and
The Lordship of Jesus Christ.
yeah, that was really the whole.
Right.
That was about
And manuscript Bible started.
manuscript.
No.
Did we do a little bit there?
No, we did a duct Bible study, but we didn't do it in level 2. It was discipleship was, let's see, that wasn't.
That was inductive Bible study.
Intensive Bible study, intensive Bible study, that's where we did the inductive Bible study. Level 3 was discipleship.
That's right.
How you disciple someone else.
That's right. As you go to disciple, how do you then go about and replicate that? Yes.
Can I just give a short personal testimony?
Sure.
I went to Hudson House in New York to, I think it was the first or second Bible and Life Level 1 that Barbara Boyd ever did.
Wow.
And she kind of latched onto me a little bit and came to my house and did some discipling. But that weekend of learning how to do inductive Bible study gave me my mission for my life. And I used that from then on, starting in the dorm, which I was scared to death. But I started Bible study, and I've done it ever since.
That's outstanding.
It was just what
So
God gave me.
You are Barbara Boyd's progeny. I mean, she would be so pleased.
And I share her name, Barbara.
You do? Oh, that's cool. All right, so I'm going to come back to that story just briefly. Let's finish this up. Who's that? Oh, wait, no. Don't say it. Just write it down, write it down. We're actually going to take score and find out who got the most of these things. Okay?
Steve Hinkle.
Do you have your answer?
Yes.
Okay. Who is this?
John Dahl.
Exactly. Yeah, is he former second president of InterVarsity? So,
Charles Troutman was second.
That's right.
oh, that's it, Charlie Trump was second. There we go. Okay, so third president. The reason that InterVarsity moved from Chicago to Madison, Wisconsin, where I do my work, is because of him. He was the department chair in geography, and I have found his office in the science building and that kind of stuff, hallowed ground. John used to lead Bible study every week, and he would invite anybody and everybody, handwritten notes, invite them to this thing, and it was done up in the social sciences building. Again, I found that room, that kind of thing. I just want to know what made this guy tick. Where did he come from, and how did he get to be this way? But an amazing leader, and the city of Madison, he is just revered. Okay, next one. Who's that?
Oh, I know him too.
Lisa, you know such a good time. You got it written down? Okay, so who is this? Okay, and why does he matter?
Everything. Marketplace ministry.
Yes.
He was regional director.
That's right. Before there was Don Paul Gross, there was Pete Hammond. He was the regional director here, wasn't he?
That's
right.
That's right. But there was 4 regions in the country, and he was one of them, the Southeast.
Yeah.
He was the guy who, when people apparently would give him cash gifts, he'd stick it in his sock. And when he ran into staff who were in trouble, instead of going through the usual accounting procedures, he just go reach in his sock. Have you seen the state of Don Paul's socks?
Not much room for that much money in it.
To try.
You got a quarter in it, right?
But again, whose shoulders we stand on? We stand on the shoulders of giants. Yes.
He was a churchman too. I met him when I was a freshman in college because I was invited to a Presbyterian youth think tank thing because of some things, liberal type things going on in the church, and he was the leader of it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So he was really committed to the church.
That's cool.
He was a real fighter for racial reconciliation in InterVarsity. If it had not been from him, I would not be on staff.
There you go. Whose shoulders we stand? That's fantastic. Yeah.
He also really was kind of the first, at least in my experience, Rabbinic MC star. right? Before various Jeanette and, you know, other people after that. And I can remember him being an MC.
All right.
He was also a mentor of entrepreneurs. When Randy was trying to get GFM started, my husband, before we had GFM, his movements, institutions are not always friendly to entrepreneurs. As Steve,
Makes sense.
who was the painter, said one time, we need these guys, these women. Leave them alone.
Right.
We can't make it without them, but they change things and it upsets everyone. So for Randy to be able to talk to Pete was really, really important. And I think that was true for some other entrepreneurial leaders.
Oh, yeah, for sure. All right, next one. 2 to go.
I can't
Oh.
You're gonna have to move. I chose that one in particular because I think the whole picture may help you figure out who this is. And you'd have to be of a certain vintage to get this. All right, you got your answer written down?
Yep.
Okay, who is this?
Ada Lum.
Exactly. Now, if you're newish to staff and you're thinking, who are these people and why did all the people around me know who these
Because
people
we're all
are?
old.
Because we're old. But we're actually doing this for years. This is actually mostly for years.
Yes.
Because we want you to hear the names and see the faces of the people who, we are the inheritors of their hard work and their faithfulness.
Amen.
What's the name again?
Can you say
Ada
it
Leave it
again?
alone.
ADA,
They are the
LUM.
hidden figures in the varsity.
So
ADA.
Ada Lum,
LUM.
L-U-M. Ada, A-D-A, Lum, L-U-M. Why does she matter in the history of university?
Bible study.
Evangelistic Bible.
Evangelistic Bible study. If you wanted to lead an evangelistic Bible study, you use Ada Lum stuff. When I was a student, way back in the day. She was prolific, but she was seemingly quite a quiet person. I heard her at Urbana, and she was on fire there, but she was typically quite a quiet person. This is taken in Hawaii, where I think she spent most of her life, actually. Yeah. But an amazing and an influential author for so many of us. All right, number 9. Who's
Yes,
that?
yes, okay.
Okay, so I think Felicia's got 9 out of 9. But write down your answer.
I know what that is.
Think Urbana 7.
That's right.
I wasn't.
That's him. That's at Urbana 70, that picture. Who is this?
Does Tom
Tom
Skinner.
Skinner.
What was
And-
he saying?
Yeah, why does
That's
Tom
the
Skinner
reason why
matter in
I'm on
the history of
IDSA.
universities? Why does he matter?
Fifth column.
Sorry?
Yes.
Didn't we talk about the fifth column evangelism?
Can you explain that?
No, well, it was, I wasn't there, help me out.
I wasn't at Urbana 70 either, but I think I've heard the speech before. Basically, he was talking about being world changers, basically, and he was talking about going within the system to change the system, but not getting caught up in the system.
But being very clear that the
Yes.
system needed to be changed. I don't think
Yes.
there's ever, from what I've heard, there's never been an Urbana like this.
Yes.
He just set the house on fire.
That's right.
And they never invited that. He was a New York evangelist.
From
He
Manhattan?
was, I guess he was a Billy Graham of black people, if you want to say it that way.
Right. Hey,
So I have an older faculty member that was at Urbana 70 as a faculty member, and he said he met Tom Skinner there, and it was the first time, and he grew up in the South, that he had ever sat down at a table with an African American.
wow,
And it began to change his mind on issues of race.
interesting. Sure. So I went to Urbana 9 years after this, the first one, and as a student. And the reverberations from 9 years earlier were still in the room.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what it was. And I had to start asking people, there is something going on here. What is that? That thing I can feel. It was reverberations from 9 years earlier. And he set the house on fire, is right. So this talk is actually available. You can find this online. And as we talk about fifth column evangelism and of changing systems from within, and my comment earlier, there are people who got to where they got to because they're really good at working inside the system and obeying the rules. That kind of talk can help wake them up to say, okay, I'm really good at working inside, but what am I here for? When Nehemiah was in cupbearer to the king Artaxerxes, he realized that I'm here for a reason and a moment. And I'm not just here to succeed as compared to the king. I am here for something much bigger than me. And that's true of our faculty and of our students as well. You're not here just for your success. You're here for something much larger and bigger. And that's where this can be really helpful. That's where the 1970 Urbana talk, that's where we can be gatekeepers of information, of talks, of resources for our students.
I just want to say when my son, my oldest son, heard that talk, of course, many, many years later, and he said to me, he said, Mom, why didn't you tell me about this before?
Interesting. Sure.
Because it really made a difference.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so that's all of the quiz. Now, let's just do the really fast scoring because I'm way out of time. How many of you got 9 out of 9?
Alicia.
All right. Alicia, and Kevin got 9 out of 9. And remember, the larger thing is just to remember that we have a history behind us. That is our, it's our, what is that word I'm looking for? In Spanish, it's all the built architecture, this amazing stuff that goes back centuries. And this is our built architecture, but of relationships and people and hard work. Can we go back to slide number 4 for a moment, please? 5, please. Sorry, there we are. Barbara, wait, this is where we were and the point I was trying to make. Here's where, and if you remember, I had this thing about disciples, influencers, managers, visionary leaders, okay? So here's where I worry about InterVarsities. Once upon a time, we had a structure in place called Bible and Life, in which it provided a way for every student coming in to hear the same talks delivered by different people in somewhat different ways, but the structures, the themes were consistent, and it was the Lordship of Jesus. Actually, Friday night started out with inducted Bible study out of the Gospels. So you met Jesus on Friday night. You guys remember these sessions. There was 8 of them all together, and if you went through it enough times, you just sort of, internalized it. But then we had you met Jesus, you heard about the Lordship of Jesus, you heard about evangelism along the way. What am I missing?
Quiet time.
Quiet time was that was session 2.
Mm-hmm.
Session 3 was the Lordship of Jesus. I should have looked this up before I came here. I can't even remember all the sessions, but I just remember that what it did was it gave us a shared vocabulary and a shared grammar of thinking about discipleship, or what it meant to follow Jesus. And so the students that went through that, and typically they were first years, some second years, is that we had this way of talking about what does it mean to follow Jesus, and we knew what that meant. Mm-hmm. As I said yesterday, when I meet with grad students nowadays, I always overshoot and my expectation of what they have actually already internalized or having daily quiet times. I always assume more than is actually the case, generally, almost always. It is certainly true about the Lordship of Jesus.
Yep.
I assume that they've internalized this and got this figured out, and I'm very often surprised to realize that actually we need to go way back. Mm-hmm. As I get into these conversations, we actually need to have a conversation about what is the gospel. Fundamentally, what is the gospel and what is the proper response to the gospel? Because if we don't get that right, then everything else we're trying to build is built on a really shaky foundation.
Amen. Amen.
We're getting the amens here. Okay. Now, so here's the question to all of us in the room, is what are we going to do, either individually or jointly, where we provide our students with a common set of expectations and understandings of what is the nature of the gospel, and what is a proper response to that gospel, and then thirdly, how do we propagate that gospel?
Okay, say that again.
What is the gospel? Because there's a certain kind of bandwidth regarding even what is the gospel. Secondly, is what is a proper response to the gospel, which is the Lordship of Jesus. And then thirdly, how do we propagate that gospel into the university? And here's where I worry about us as a movement, is I think we've lost the grammar and vocabulary for talking about that thing coherently. And we need to recover that. Bible and Life disappeared when Barbara Boyd retired.
Could you please repeat the some sentence? How do we guess?
You and I we'll talk afterwards when I do that for you. We'll do that online. Sure. But that's why I worry about us. And that's where, as a region, perhaps, that's the kind of work that could happen together as a region, to think, what do we need to do that way, that we're actually making sure that we're not assuming too much and passing over things that we really need to take care of.
John, this is probably a bigger question, but that question, what role does the church play in that too?
That's a great question.
You know, all the local churches,
Yes.
that's kind of the foundation they should be giving, should we be doing
Well, we
that?
can't
Or
assume
should
it.
the church-
That's the thing.
Obviously, it's both, but
Right.
how do we work with local churches to help those foundations get strong?
Precisely. No, it's okay.
I think sometimes this lives in tension with developing leaders. I went to college in the 90s, and our fellowship was committed to making disciples, and when I came on our varsity staff, disciple was not even a word. Everybody wanted to be a leader.
Yes.
Tell me how to be a leader. Train me to be a leader. I want to be a powerful leader, good leader, good leader.
Yes.
And I was like, just because I was like, if you're not a disciple, you're going to be a terrible leader. You're going to lead people in the wrong direction. And
Yes.
so I lived in tension, but then I realized, okay, if I want to make disciples, I make them a leader.
Right.
I have to give them a position.
Yes.
And then they'll give me time.
Right.
But I think that's always a tension, and with grad students, because their time is so limited, sometimes we have to take a trade-off of saying, more important to me that you're a disciple than that you're a leader.
Exactly.
That may shrink the possibilities for how much the group grows.
So you just encapsulated it right there, and I wish I could just bottle that, because I think that's actually a really important conversation for us to have.
Yeah.
Really important. And are we having the conversation, actually? Kevin said maybe this is a bigger question than we really want to deal with. That's, Kevin, were you here last night?
Yeah.
2 nights ago, or whatever?
No, it's 2 nights.
Right, whatever. The idea is that we're asking better and better questions that get to the heart of what it is we're trying to do. That's what I'm here for, and part is I understand what I'm trying to do. Please do.
In a sense, back then, we sort of had our elevator speech in EDM. But now, you gotta have all these complicated explanations.
What's EDM?
Evangelism, discipleship.
So if you were around of a certain vision or certain vintage, that is how we understood our work, was evangelism, discipleship, and mission. And then with every succeeding president, we have to redo the vocabulary and the grammar. And I can never keep track of them all, but I came in underneath the evangelism, discipleship, mission, and I still in my head think that's what I'm doing. You know, it may get said different ways, but that's what we're trying to do. So thank you for the event. There was an elevator speech about that kind of thing. Now, I am wildly out of time, or running out of time, so let me let's go back to that evangelism or the discipleship influencer thing. There we go. This is the principal thing we really need to focus on, I think. Before we're trying to develop leaders to run our programs, we really need to think about doing discipleship. And by the way, our annual field report doesn't always necessarily help us in this, because
Amen.
it doesn't reflect the
Amen.
necessity of doing the first things first. We absolutely have to keep first things first, and if our annual field report isn't reflecting the realities of doing first things priority, we end up getting distracted because we manage the things we measure. And how do you measure that? How do you know when you're doing a good job on campus with
I've
us?
got a number right now. I can help.
That's a question that we need to keep asking ourselves, is are we doing this, and how do we know we're doing it and doing it well? I want to talk about these people momentarily. Okay, so Tim, I'm keeping you really busy here, I know.
That's fine.
So before you move, influencer. I used to use that term pretty widely. Now that term has been corrupted. Can we get to the influencers? Here's influencer number 1. Do we know who this is?
Beyonce?
It's one of the Kardashian women. She is America's youngest self-made billionaire. Billionaire, not millionaire, billionaire. At 21 years old. That's what, I can't remember which one it is, but
Probably Kim.
I'm trying to find a picture of this woman that I could actually show you. Take a while.
You had somebody else look for that though, right?
She does have a jacket on. So I was told early on that she made $75,000 for every photo that she uploaded of herself wearing something. And so then I said, 75,000 bucks, and she's a billionaire? So I actually went back and did the math briefly and I was like, that's over 13,000 photos, uploads, to get to $1 billion. So she's making more than $75,000 per image that she uploads about herself wearing something. But a billionaire at the age of 21. Mark Zuckerberg became a billionaire at the age of 23. 23. So she is outstripping poor Jerry, can
That's another quote there, right?
Does anybody know who this is? Influencer number 2?
Spelling bee, I don't know.
No. She looks like a spelling bee
Swedish
contest.
girl?
The Swedish girl.
Yeah.
Without her name, why do we know who this is?
Yeah, so she's pushing for environmental changes and she wants to, she knows the world that we're creating is not gonna be good for, her generation and those beyond.
That's right. Her name is Greta Thunberg.
Not a billionaire.
Not a billionaire? Who knows? But the young lady at 16 is being invited into the halls of power because she carries around a hand sign, typically in the Plaza Mayores, the major cities. And her mother is somehow connected to what she's doing. Her mother is apparently very savvy about this stuff, but she wears plain clothes, she always wears braids, they're thinking about presentation.
Oh, of course.
And the woman is preternaturally composed and poised in front of a group of people. So she'll go into the House of Parliament in England. I've read her stuff. It is like the work of Winston Churchill and that kind of thing. And it's like this 16-year-old young lady pulling this off. She is a hero of mine. Given the nature of what I care about, this woman's amazing. Influencer number 3. You guys know who this is?
Alex Leon.
No.
He's the Hong Kong.
Yeah, right movement, wrong guy.
Yellow umbrella movement.
Yeah, the umbrella movement. What's his name again? Josh Wong. I'll just help you.
Okay.
Joshua Wong. This guy is my third and final influencer because he's a Christian. And he's on the streets. And he is trying to confront the Chinese government over their rule or misrule of Hong Kong. He was doing this as a teenager. He doesn't do this by himself. He's got a cohort. There's a community of people. None of us arise sui generis by ourselves. There's always a community of people behind us. But Josh Wong is a guy who's just amazing in terms of his physical courage to do what he is doing. Because he is threatened with jail and being disappeared off the streets of Hong Kong in rendition to China. He is a Christian. I want to know what creates people like this. Who stands behind this guy? How did he get to be that way? We have people like this who could become the next Josh Wongs and Greta Thunbergs.
Amen.
In our fellowships at our universities. They need people behind them who believe in them and breathe vision and passion and support behind them. We could be the people that help create the Josh Wongs and Greta Thunbergs. Walk away. Okay, we can get rid of that image and go back up to the disciples, influencers, and so on. Here we go. So, most of our people are never going to become those kinds of folks. Hopefully they never become a Kardashian. In that way. They may be wonderful people, I have no idea. But if they became a Thunberg or a Wong, that'd be amazing. But my mind's changing on this. I used to think that that's what I was doing. Go change the university, change the world. We need to recruit the Josh Wongs and Greta Thunbergs. Now I'm in a different place, and so let me tell you briefly about a woman who was a really strong influencer. Her name was Tammy. She was 5 feet tall, 98 pounds. Very, very ordinary looking young lady who came from a pretty poor background. She was really good friends with Carrie Minter, actually. They were some of the best buds. When I was getting started back with InterVarsity, the first thing that you did, if you were going to start an InterVarsity chapter on any campus, you started a daily prayer meeting. That's how you started a fellowship. You begin to pray. So I had some students, and I was saying, I think before we do anything else, before we can begin to dream, we need to begin to pray, and we need to begin to pray daily. Are any of you guys interested? And the very first person who said, I'd be willing to do that, was Tammy. She was a freshman, didn't know any better, but she was willing to pray. And then she very quickly recruited Carrie, and so the three of us began to pray. And as we began to pray, we didn't talk much about this, we just began to add people. We met at the student union, and we prayed at noons, and we prayed for 25 minutes, and we had lunch for 25 minutes, and we'd leave. And as people found out what we were doing upstairs on the second floor of the union, they began to join us. And they kept joining us. And by the end of that first year, we would have somewhere between 15 to 20 people praying every day. And then the second year, it was like, the room is too small, and we've got people who can't get here at noon, they can get here at 1 though. And so we started 2 meetings, 2 prayer meetings a day, 1 at noon, 1 at 1. And the thing began to grow. And as we began to pray, things began to happen. We saw people coming to Jesus out of prayer. We saw faculty seeking us out to pray for the university, that sort of thing. Tammy was never going to become this person, the visionary strategic motivator like a Josh Wan or a Greta Thunberg, but she was deeply influential in the life of that fellowship. When that story gets told, and it did get told by 2100, by the way. 2100 came to my campus because they're 90 miles west of there at the time, and we were doing this evangelistic thing, and they wanted to know, they wanted to film me doing all this stuff, and they wanted to know how it all happened. I said, actually, the person you really need to be filming is right over here. It was Tammy, at 5 foot tall and 98 pounds, that kind of thing. And Tammy was like, I don't want to be on camera. No, I'm not doing this. That kind of thing. So she refused to go on camera, that sort of thing. But she was the person, if you want to know the story of why it is that so many people are coming to Jesus, she's right over there. Deeply influential, but never a leader in a major role. We have people around us, we have lots of Tammys actually, I think, who if nurtured and challenged along the way could become those kinds of people. We have faculty who could do that. Would you be willing to pray? I can do that. They need to be invited. Yes, that's it. Okay, so I'm out of time. I just need to bow to reality and the clock. So here's my wind-up. I said at the front end, I think we have got the best jobs in the world. When I was moving from undergrad to GFM, I saw in the paper that an alum from my undergrad days had gotten a great job in Madison, Wisconsin, which is where I was going. And so I was writing thank you notes to the donors, and I thought, well, I'll just write her a note and tell her, hey, you know, I'm heading to Madison, I'm going to start work with grad students, and I'd love to tell you what I'm doing at your fundraising department, that kind of thing. And so I hadn't seen her in like 10 years. And so we got, she said, sure, come on, when you're coming, just let me know, and we'll get together. So she invited me to her place. She was single, and as I got to the door, I had my case, I had everything ready to go. And I heard the Lord say, before I knocked, and before she answered the door, I heard the Lord say, shut up about the money. Okay. She opened the door, and it was like, oh my goodness, 9 years. Wow. And you're now a director in this, the youngest director ever hired by our insurance company, that kind of thing, promoted into that position. And so we got talking, and she asked me, so tell me again, what is it you do exactly? And I said, well, I mostly sit around and drink coffee and talk to people. And she said, okay, that's cute, but really, what do you really do? And so I took about 20 minutes and explained the full breadth and depth of what I do. And she said, so what you're trying to tell me is that you sit around and drink coffee and talk to people. Exactly. And she said, that is the biggest scam I've ever heard. And we were married 18 months later. It's true. We have got, who gets to sit around and drink coffee, talk to people, and call it work? And it's not just drink coffee and talk to people. We were talking to people about ultimate things.
Amen.
The things that matter most in this world, we get to do that on an everyday basis. So let me pray for us, and we'll get into the next thing. Lord, we thank you so much that you've called us into these roles, that we get to do the things that are so enjoyable and so fun at one level. And at another level, it's heartbreaking, and it's hard, and it's nerve-wracking at another. But it's the nature, it seems, of being one of your shepherds in the field. And so, Lord, we pray you'd help us to be great shepherds. Lord, we pray that as we have responsibilities for your people, Lord, we pray you'd help us to lead them well. Lord, where it's our position to teach, we pray you'd help us to teach them well. And when it comes to being prophetic, Lord, we pray you'd help us to challenge them well, where they need to be. And as we ask it for our constituency, Lord, we pray for ourselves as well. Lord, that we would be pastored, that we would be challenged, that we'd be encouraged where we need it. So thank you, Lord, for times like this, that we get to be community together to make things like this happen. So, Lord, thank you for our time together. thank you for my brothers and sisters. And Lord, now send us forth from this place, from these regional meetings after tomorrow. And Lord, help us to go do the good work you've called us to. In your Son's name. Amen.